Well, we see this happening, but we see general public-wise, because we know we're starting to bypass that traditional media filter, but where are people going for their news? When they're looking for news and information about a company, the first place that they're going today, obviously, is the search engine, followed by an online news source. And that's what we see in the secondary source as well. Then print, then broadcast, then the corporate website. And then way down at the bottom, social media. Does that really make sense? I thought we were seeing this explosion of social media. Everybody loves social media, right? But it's down at the bottom. But let's think about this for a second. When you get a message in Facebook or Twitter, who is the source of that message? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Is that the source?
Someone you know.
Maybe it's someone you know. So it's not Facebook, it's not Twitter, it's the person who sent the message. So Facebook and Twitter is just the medium, but they're not the source. So it's just the method of how that information gets on. It may be that person that you know that's passed that information on. It may be the link that they send you to. So people don't generally think of social media as the source. They think of the source somewhere more up that food chain. So as we look at this, importance of search becomes very relevant when we look at that news traffic landscape. Because today, out of the 7 most trafficked news sites in the world, and yes, Yahoo News is still the most trafficked news site in the world. With all their problems, they're still the most trafficked news site in the world, the most trafficked financial site, the most trafficked sports site in the world. And 4 out of the top 7 produce little, if any, actual news content themselves. They produce a little bit, but not really that much. So we have to start thinking and not just designing our marketing programs for our audiences in mind, but our audience has to also include today that search engine spider. We see this growing in the US in the online news demand of how people are getting their news and their information. 207 million people are going every single day to the search engines to find news, to find information. And we see this happening not just in the United States, we see this happening in just about every market that I go to. That more and more people are shifting the way that they consume news, the way that they consume media. So the principles that I have of communicating a message today really comes down to 3 things. The first is that you have to make your content as accessible as possible. Now when I think about accessibility, there's a lot of ways to think about that, but when I talk about it, what I really mean is how easy is it for somebody to access my information if on the very low end they're using a dial-up modem. And you know what? There are millions of people around the world that still use dial-up today. But let's go to the opposite extreme. How many of you have something like this in one of your pockets? Okay, so what happens if you're on a dial-up or you're on one of these and you send out a big fat PDF? What happens?
You delete it.
Well, you delete it or you can't access it if someone's trying to access it online. So what do? You move on. You move on to something else, somewhere else where I can get that information, but guess what? It's now not going to be from you. So we're putting up barriers. So how do we lower the barriers and make our content more accessible? How do we make our content easy to view? And when I say easy to view, what I really mean there is how easy is it for someone to view that content when they want to, how they want to, where they want to. And that's really the search factor. How can they find my content easily? And then finally, they've accessed it, they've viewed it. Can they do something with it? Can they use it? It's that accessibility, viewability, usability factor. And so as we think about this, we look at something called the long tail. How many of you are familiar with the long tail? Okay, for those of you who are not, long tail, it started as a book called The Long Tail. It was written by the managing editor of Wired magazine. And it's basically on modern economic theory, taking the ideas of the 20/80 rule, saying it doesn't quite apply anymore. But we think about the 20/80 rule a little bit differently, because think about, iTunes today or wherever you get your music, Spotify for instance. Why do you use Spotify versus, going traditional methods of going to a record store? Because it's free, right? But it's not just because it's free, because they have everything. So if I'm interested in finding that new hot polka band, somewhere in the world there is a new hot polka band. But if I'm interested in finding that, I'm probably not going to go to the record store because they're bound by shelf space. So I'm going to go online, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, somewhere where I can more easily find that information because they're not bound by shelf space. In the US, iTunes actually makes more than 40% of their profits from items that sell once a month, once a quarter, once a year. So we see that shift also happening in how we communicate. And so what we look at is these axes. And we see the news release to the level of conversation. And the reason I start with the news release is that that's the way that most companies start a conversation, is by issuing their official word. So when we think about that news release, well, typically, this is what it looks like. That news release goes out, we see the conversation spike, and then it sort of tails out, right? So if we look at this over time, we see the release that goes out. If you're utilizing PR Newswire, it's sending to thousands of online databases and search engines, and you get some immediate online pickup where we've placed the content. But now blogs, Twitter, and online publications are picking up on that content even before the mainstream media does. But once the mainstream media picks up on that content, more blogs, Twitter, and online publications, followed by the weekly trades. Then we start to tail out a little bit more to the monthlies, the quarterly, pubs and journals. But 3 to 6 months down the road, is that conversation completely dead? And the answer is no. The conversation continues on. And it continues on through search, share, and blog. Think to yourselves, how many of you have ever searched for something and the content that you found that was pertinent to you right there at that moment was more than 3 to 6 months old? Happens to me all the time. And then I have the opportunity to share it with somebody, blog about it, bookmark it, do something with that content. And so we look at the head and the tail, and we see traditional media, online media, and search. Well, through traditional media, we have the opportunity to reach millions of people, but through search over time, we have the opportunity to reach billions of people. And billions of people are interested because they're searching for our content, and our content is coming up. So we look at this over a 6-month period, and now we have different axes, but we have the amount of coverage from the time of origination. And with the 50,000 plus companies and organizations that we work with worldwide, this is kind of what we see. Over a 6-month period, 3 distinct messages. So we look at 3 distinct messages. What is the problem with this image here? Well, let's think about this idea of control we were talking about before. How many of you had somebody, an executive say, or a client maybe say, we really need to control this message? All right, so what do you say when somebody says that to you? You can't. Okay, but does that mean you should give up? Not necessarily. So what we're doing here is, in reality, is when we speak in like this, we're actually letting go of control. So when I was growing up in the United States, we had a little game that we played as a kid. And we called it game telephone. I don't know if there's a different name for it here. But what would happen is we'd start with a message over here, and we would whisper it around, and we whisper it around all the way throughout here. So did you guys have that game? What did you call it? I'm sorry?
I don't think it's
Whispering game.
Whisper game, I think.
Whispering game. Okay. All right. So you took that message around, and what happened once it got to the end over here?
Different.
It's different. It's changed. It's distorted. And that's exactly what we're allowing to happen here with our messages. If we're communicating on a very sort of random basis, once every 2 months, we're allowing our message to get distorted. We're allowing somebody else to take and change our message. So how do you control a conversation today?
You provide information.
You provide information. You do it the same way you always controlled a conversation. You keep talking. The person who's leading the conversation has to continue to talk. So today, instead of communicating on this manner, it's so important for us we have to communicate like this. Shorter messages on a much more regular basis. So as the conversation starts to wane, we are injecting new information into that conversation. So as we see that taking shape and we start to think of how we can sort of have a shared control over what's happening, well, we tend to communicate more. shorter messages, and that's actually even better for those search engine spiders. Because in fact, even in the business-to-business case, it doesn't matter if you're necessarily utilizing a news release. Sometimes it's utilizing a news release that leads to a tweet, that leads to a blog post. Well, one of the things that we found is for publicly traded companies, and a study that was done by the University of Michigan found that companies who tweet on a regular basis, that are communicating on a regular basis, have a more steady share price. In fact, frequency of disclosure and depth of disclosure equal to a better, more steady share price. So there is business-to-business applications here when we're talking about emerging media. And in fact, here in Stockholm, 40 of the 56 large cap companies on the Stockholm Stock Exchange are currently on Facebook or Twitter. So we see this taking place. I want to explain a little bit about how companies can talk on Twitter. So Jeremiah Oyang, who is really one of the top analysts in the emerging media space, he works at a company called Altimeter in the US. He really broke it down that there's 4 types of Twitter accounts. The first is the pure corporate brand. The pure corporate brand is the one who's utilized Twitter basically as a megaphone. This is what we released today. They don't have conversations or anything. How many of you know of a company that's like that? Okay. Now, there's then the corporate with persona. And if we think of corporate with persona, what we're really thinking about is the corporate brand that actually has a personality. In fact, there's a book that was written by a gentleman by the name of Rohit Bhagrava. And that book is called Personality Not Included. And it's all about why companies and organizations need to have a personality today. It's a great book and I highly suggest you read it. But going back to this pure corporate brand or corporate with persona, an example of this is actually how PR Newswire, we run our Twitter account. And you can see we've actually talked about who the people are who run our Twitter account. We're very transparent and we try to have a little bit of personality and we have conversations with folks. So we look at that, and then what we have is the employee with corporate association. That might be someone similar to many of us in this room. We identify who we work with, but our thoughts are our own. Finally, you have the pure personal account, and that's someone who doesn't identify who they work with or anything, but they're really tweeting for their own personal pleasure. However, it's very important that we educate the folks that we work with and educate our own forces and our own staffs about how to utilize social media correctly and how not to utilize social media. Because if your name may not be associated with your brand on Facebook, on Twitter, but if there's somewhere online that your personal brand, your name can be associated with the brand that you work for, guess what? You still have to be accountable. And I'll tell you a little story that happened actually at PR Newswire. So when I first set up PR Newswire's Facebook page a few years back, I was really interested to see who was joining and liking our page every day. And I saw this one person joined, and I didn't know the person's name, and I saw the picture, and it was kind of risque. I was like, okay, it was this woman and looked like it was like a negligee or something. I'm like, all right, who is this person? So I took that person's name and I ran it through Google. Brought up their LinkedIn page. Well, that person actually worked at PR Newswire. In fact, that person worked in our internal communications group, who I didn't know. And I called her up and I said, hey, you joined our Facebook page. Oh, yeah. You may want to rethink your picture you're using. What do you mean? Well, that picture, it's public. What? Yeah, you may want to, wait a minute, no, you shouldn't have been able to see them. Well, that's your profile pic, and you join the Facebook page, and so everybody knows that. It doesn't matter whether you're associated with PR Newswire, a quick Google search, and boom. Let me tell you, phone got slammed, and all of a sudden that picture was changed in about 1 minute.